Relatively Prime was made possible by the 159 totally amazing, awesome people who supported the Kickstarter project. I don't have time to thank them all by name, but I do have time to thank two of them. So thank you, Greg Bailey and David Stroop, as well as my Kickstarter producers, Cody Palmer, Douglas Dollars Stewart, Colin Wright, Jay Frosting, Daniel Greenspun, and Martin Dominic. Without all of you, this show never would have been possible. I am Samuel Hansen, and you are listening to Relatively Prime, stories from the mathematical domain. There are many similarities between mathematics and music. They are their own vocabulary, their own written language, their own way of describing the world around us. But while they are similar, the Venn diagram that contains mathematics and music doesn't always seem to have a huge overlap. Well, today, I bring you 3 stories from that intersection. First, a story of mathematics applied to music, in a way that I sincerely doubt any musician would have thought up. And then, the story of what happens when you take mathematician and musician and combine it into a single person. And then finally, the story of a composer, specifically, the composer whose piece I'm speaking over right now, and how he has harnessed the power of numbers as a music creation tool.
My name is Scott Ricard. I am an associate professor in, electronic engineering. It would be, the department name is quite long, but electronic engineering is my area of study. And I am the founding director of the Complex and Adaptive Systems Laboratory at UCD, which is University College Dublin.
I first heard about Professor Ricard because of a video of a TEDx talk that he gave that found itself rather rapidly spread around the mathematical community on the internet. This talk had a rather unique topic. It was about, well, you know what? It might be better to let him tell you about it. So you do electronic engineering. I'm not here to talk to you about that technically.
Yeah. My PhD is actually in applied mathematics, applied and computational mathematics, but I've always had a very keen interest in music. And my undergraduate degrees were in electronic engineering, specifically in sonar sound processing. So I guess I started my career in kind of audio processing of sonar sounds, and I've kind of stayed in the audio theme my entire life, always with this background passion around music. Unfortunately, my abilities aren't the same as my passion for music. So that's why I'm a practicing mathematician with an interest in music as opposed to the other way around.
So from my viewpoint, this clearly means that you are literally the most qualified person in the world to talk to me about musical beauty. So what is musical beauty?
Yeah, so one mind frame we might argue would say that things that are beautiful are based on symmetries or repetitions or patterns. And for example, in many symphonic works, there is the expectation of repetition that's set up because repetitions occur, often within the structure of the piece as well as within the individual structure of the melodies. You could think of ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. And right there, just in that first theme, you already see that there's so many repeated little kind of micro themes in there. And it's in setting up that expectation for repetition and then breaking it, I believe that a lot of what we call beauty is created. Of course, beauty is in the eye or ear of the beholder in this case. So I would argue that pure random music, for example, it would be difficult to classify that as beautiful. Although to somebody it might be, to some people it might sound beautiful, but I would say that that's probably not what the general populace would call beauty.
Then what would ugly music be like? So if that's beautiful music, what would ugly music be?
Well, aside from somebody taking a bunch of cowbells and dropping them downstairs, so if we first, let's say that we have to restrict ourselves to to certain rules, and then within those rules to try and write the ugliest music. So one set of rules that we could do is we could say that we're only going to use notes on the kind of standard Western scale, maybe the 88 notes of the piano, so that we're not going to vary the instruments. We're not going to vary how loud the instruments play. We're going to pick one instrument, and we're only going to use the 88 notes of that instrument. So that might be one thing that we try and do. And as a mathematician, of course, we try and simplify everything as much as possible first, and then maybe solve a special case. So let's say that we're only going to look at the 88 notes of the piano, and then let's also say that we can only play each note once, rather than worrying about things like chords or the obviously the uncountably infinite number of ways that you can play multiple notes or notes in different sequences where you're repeating notes. Let's say we're only going to play each note once. And right there, that limits the number of melodies that we can consider to 88 factorial, it turns out, which obviously is an impossibly large number, but still, it's a finite number. And from that 88 factorial number that we have, we want to basically find the ugliest one. And let's define ugly as something which has no repetitions. We already have the no note repetition mandate. But the other no repetition could be that if I go up by a third, let's say between two notes, a C to an E, I can go up by a third, and no other adjacent notes are allowed to go up by a third. So there's no repetition of any interval. And that was basically the guidelines that I used to create this, the perfect ping, or the ugliest piece of music that I called it.
How? I mean, this is the question. That how do you go about making this piece? How do you go about creating something devoid of these patterns that I think we are probably naturally drawn to creating?
Yeah, well, the only reason that we would know that you could create such patterns is really a kind of well, it's a serendipitous discovery, in that this sonar engineer by the name of John Costas was trying to create the perfect sonar ping, and he realized that in our musical analogy, if you could create a piece of music that was devoid of patterns, that would make a really, really good sonar ping, since sonar pings are perfect if they don't look like any shift of themselves in time or frequency, i.e., if they don't contain any patterns that repeat. And he could construct them by hand. You can construct very short ones, but he wanted to construct big ones with lots of notes, and he didn't know how to do this. So it turns out that he had read an article in a magazine by this guy, Solomon Gollum, a famous professor, who had written kind of an article about games in this magazine. And John thought that this guy would be the guy that he should contact. He might know about where these patterns are and how to create them. No one had thought about these patterns, it turns out. Solomon Gollum was a very good discrete mathematician, and he would know if anybody had constructed these things, and he couldn't find any references to them. And within the period of a few months, he invented two ways which rely on prime number theory that to this day remain the only discovered generators of these patterns, and it's based on prime numbers, based on this Galois field theory that this mathematics invented hundreds of years ago by this French mathematician. So it's the fact that these patterns exist, that they exist at all, is actually quite interesting. From a mathematical point of view, you can prove that they really, from a kind of a random point of view, they shouldn't exist. People have written papers that show that randomly these things can't, as the number of notes you try and find in the pattern, as that number gets larger and larger, you're not going to ever find any of these patterns. The chance that they randomly exist becomes vanishingly small, and the expected number of them falls to zero very quickly. And yet we know that they do exist, and we can construct them for infinitely large sizes for as many notes as you would want. You want a pattern with more than 1,000 notes, and we can create them because of this mathematical curiosity.
I can actually still remember when I first heard this piece, this world's ugliest piece of music, And I remember feeling kind of odd about it because I listened to it and I didn't find myself hating it. I mean, there's plenty of music out there that I hate. There's plenty of music out there that I love. But one thing that I found with all of this music is that it elicited some sort of strong emotional response, be it either hate or love. What I found from your piece is that it actually elicited zero emotional response whatsoever. It was something that was just kind of there. I recognized that it was a musical instrument playing, but I couldn't recognize it as music at all. And so it seemed like something other to me when I heard it.
It's interesting that you say it has no emotive response. We obviously, if you read the comments that people have on the various YouTube or other recordings of it, yeah, lots of people have very different opinions about what it is and isn't. Most people agree that it's not ugly, and I certainly don't think it's ugly. I actually think it's quite beautiful. The ugliest piece of music was more of a bit of a provocative title as opposed to an accurate descriptive title. So I think that it's interesting that you say that there's no emotion. I like that. I like that interpretation. When I hear the piece of music, I feel a great deal of emotion, almost as if it's always speaking to me. As I said in the description of the piece before it was played, search for a pattern, search for repetition, and then revel in the fact that you'll never hear one. So I find the piece as if it's always longing toward something, longing toward what we expect in Western music, and yet never ever obtaining it. So I find it quite a kind of an emotional angst of a piece to listen to. Although I've listened to it so many times now in this generation that I find it quite beautiful because I know what's going to happen next. I have my favorite bits as it is as well because I've repeated it. It's a piece that's only meant to be listened to once in some ways because once you listen to it multiple times, then you of course get to the piece itself is the structure itself becomes a repetition. So one giant repetition. So
I I mean, from a mathematics standpoint, this is very interesting to me, and I'm sure to other people, who are interested in mathematics. What sort of reactions have you had, say, from the group of people who are not mathematicians but instead musicians?
yeah, well, lots of musicians rightly point out that I'm not a musician and don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to musicology, and that's fine. I don't. As I said, my passion and my abilities, or my passion and my knowledge, are divergent there. So the reaction of some people is to say that musicologists have known about these things, blah blah blah, and I don't know, that there's nothing new to see here. And I would disagree with that because I think the people that say that fail to appreciate, and this is my own failing, fail to appreciate the uniqueness of these structures and how unusual it is that we even know that they exist. And the other group of people that I find interesting are those that basically say, oh, sure, the piece that you've created, you claimed was ugly, but it's not that ugly because you didn't vary other things, like the instrument that it was played or the dynamic. Those are the two things that people like to say. And yeah, that's true. I could have varied lots of things. I could have had the piece played in different cities at different times so that there was, in fact, no hope of repetition because no one could hear the whole piece. I mean, there's lots of no one actually suggested that one, but that's my extremal point there. That there's lots of things we could have varied, and what this was, and I guess I should have explained this as well in the talk that I gave, is that that this is kind of bearing it down to its bare, going down to its bare essentials, to its simplest case. So, and in restricting it, I think we learn something. Once you take off all restrictions, I'm not sure exactly what we can learn from that, other than that infinite variety produces, absolutely horrendous music. I would imagine if you try and vary absolutely everything. So this was within the basic time and tone space of music, what we could, pushing the boundaries there in terms of going out on the tail of pattern free.
Hey, well, thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed talking to you.
And now that we've heard Professor Ricard talk about this song, we should probably give it a listen. Robert Schneider is a PhD student in mathematics at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Oh, and he also happens to be the lead singer of the band The Apples in Stereo and one of the co-founders of the Elephant Six Collective. So I knew that he had to have a good story about the intersection of mathematics and music.
So Pythagoras was an ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician. He and his followers basically, they believed that there were numbers sort of as the backdrop of the physical world, and I guess the mental world too. He discovered the laws of sort of music theory and behavior of like resonant instrument strings, things that would strike, flutes and tubes of air and stuff like that. So if you take like a vibrating string, like a guitar string, right? So you touch the string in the or press it in the middle of the string. That's at the 12th fret on the guitar, but it divides the string into two parts. And you hear a harmonic that's like an octave higher. As you touch other points along the string, dividing it up into certain lengths, you divide the vibrating string up into a bunch of like little mini waveforms. You can actually see it if you do it on the guitar and you hit the harmonics. You can like look at the string and you can see that it actually is divided up into a bunch of little vibrating areas that are divided by nodes that aren't vibrating. So it's super cool. It turns out that the notes that we hear in the musical scale, the harmonics that we hear when we play physical instruments are related to whole numbers. Because you divide up the string, or let's say it's a column of air, these things get divided up into the same, integer number of parts as the waveforms are kind of like, bouncing around or whatever in the medium. That same thing is related to number theory. That is, number theory is sort of, very broadly, the theory of sort of patterns that ripple through the whole numbers. Well, I mean, there's so much more to it, actually, so maybe I want to take back what I just said. But anyway, so Pythagoras was the first number theorist. He was also like the first music theorist. He was a vegetarian, and I like that because I'm a vegetarian. And I'm sure he had his flaws. All of those things are really, really cool. The Pythagorean scale is the scale that you get from all of those harmonics, not including their octaves, that you can get from touching a string and dividing it up into integer numbers of little mini waves. So the musical scale that you get, if you basically tune to the resonant properties of physical instruments, of the harmonics, is the Pythagorean scale. You could take a string and get all the harmonics, touch all the points where you would produce harmonic frequencies, and tune another string, a set of strings to each of those tones, and you'd find that there were 12 different tones, and those 12 tones are basically the scale that we hear. When we play a piano, let's say, up from like a given note up to the next octave above it by hitting all of the white and the black keys in order. That's a chromatic scale. So a chromatic scale is just a scale where all of the notes or the tones in the scale are like equally spaced apart. The Pythagorean scale is not a chromatic scale, but it's very close to a 12-tone chromatic scale. But if you take the octave and you divide it up the right way, you get a scale where all of the notes are equally spaced, and that's the scale that we play in the modern world, at least on like pianos, synthesizers, and that kind of stuff. That was like innovated, I think. It was evolving around the time of Bach. The Pythagorean scale doesn't hit all of those equally spaced chromatic notes exactly. Some of the notes are a little lower, some are a little higher. Like when you hear it, when you're like singing it or something, you can't tell the difference. In fact, I'm pretty sure like guitars and string instruments might be tuned the way you tune them. Just when you tune one to itself, I think you tune it to a Pythagorean scale, I think, because you're dealing with the properties of the vibrating string to produce your tuning with harmonics and stuff. My friend Tim McIntyre plays in a band called Von Hemling. Started the Elephant Six Collective, or co-started it with me and a group of friends. Was very interested in temperament and in tuning and listening to like modern classical music. He had come to hate hearing the fudge factor. When you tune instruments to this equally spaced tuning, the tuning fights a little bit against the resonant properties of the instrument, because the instrument doesn't care exactly what your formula was that you used to tune it. It just wants to sit there and resonate nicely in a Pythagorean tuning. The instrument does. But here you've tuned its notes slightly off from that tuning, and so all those harmonics that are on the vibrating string will be sort of like fighting against the notes that you're playing, especially if you play chords. Your instrument, just a little bit, is like struggling or fighting against those chords, and this would bother my friend Jim. He wanted to hear stuff only in just intonation, kind of like the natural tuning to the natural harmonics of the instrument. He was talking about this one day. I was at his apartment. I should note that he's an incredible genius, and so like he's really feeling this stuff. It's as if your stereo had one blown speaker and the other speaker had like a crackle, and you'd be like just crazy about it. He was, very passionate about this topic. As he was telling me that, it occurred to me that there are these beat frequencies that are sort of wandering around inside the music, and that maybe you could tune your notes. You could tune them in a way that those frequencies would seem natural. At the time, I was studying the prime number theorem, and like Riemann's work towards the prime number theorem involves like waveforms and logarithms. So like the first thing that popped into my mind was, what about tuning waveforms to logarithms? As I left my friend's house, I got in my car, I wrote down the formula, and sort of wondered if that would be musical, if it would be some totally just random, crazy series of tones that would sound mechanical or something, like maybe a machine would produce them. I didn't know. The point is that if you generate, say, two pitches, like two sine waves, let's say, and you play them together, there's a third frequency that's generated that's called the beat frequency. So let's say one frequency is 500 hertz, the other frequency is 400 hertz. So you take the difference between those two frequencies, which is 100 hertz in this case. That is called the beat frequency, sort of like a little wobbling that you hear in the sound. My thought was, if you tune the pitches to the sequence of logarithms of the whole numbers, then the difference between two logarithms, like let's say your pitches are proportional to log 6 and log 3, the difference between those, log 6 minus log 3, is also, it's the logarithm of the ratio of the two pitches. So, of course, log 6 minus log 3, that beat frequency is also proportional to log 6 over 3, which is log 2. And log 2 is also a note in our scale. You have a sequence of pitches, a scale, and when you play chords in the scale, the beat frequencies that are generated between the pitches could also be members of the scale if you chose them right. It seems kind of like theoretically nice and kind of beautiful, and in a totally non-natural resonating properties of instruments kind of way, it gives you this natural sort of musical scale where you have beat frequencies are related to the pitches you're playing. After about a year of wondering about it, I was talking to my brother-in-law, Craig Morris, who's a musician and has a studio. We were talking about it, and he was like, I think if you just used a sine wave generator and generated those pitches, I could turn them into MIDI files for you to play on a keyboard. I was like, no way, that'd be great. And remember the first time I actually pressed the notes, it was so shocking. The sequence of the keys and the notes associated with them on a keyboard or on a piano, you grow up with the sounds, these notes attached to that particular arrangement of keys. Most of these pitches are not approximating the Pythagorean scale. They're these logarithmic tones. The first few tones in the scale, the lowest notes, are kind of spaced kind of far apart. And as you go from one note to the note right next to it, the notes get closer and closer together. The number of notes in each octave kind of increased exponentially. So I had limited it to the octave of notes, the 12 tones actually, that are from the notes that are proportional to the natural log of 4 up to the log 16, because log 16 is twice log 4, and to get the octave of a pitch, it double the frequency. There were 12 tones, 4, 5, 6, up through 16. There were 12 tones in that octave, and it pretty much blew my mind. It was like hearing your mom turn towards you and start to speak in a deep man's voice, hearing a cat sing like a bird. It sort of made my brain hurt a little bit or something, because it was so different from the scale that is ingrained in my synapses. Hearing these weird beat frequencies and stuff. When you play chords, they kind of sound like crickets chirping. If you play other chords, it sounds like elevator or machinery or bells ringing. I called it non-Pythagorean just because it's not Pythagorean, and I thought it sounded catchier than logarithmic scale. The thing is that the Appleton Stand are a pop band, and we try to make really catchy music that feel good to listen to your ears. At the same time, we sort of are in the habit of putting lots of sound effects and strange sounds in our music, and also stringing the songs together on an album with link tracks. That I had been experimenting with the scale while we were recording our album New Magnetic Wonder. The album had quite a lot of kind of experimental link tracks and different little pieces. And so it made sense to put things that sounded like alien music in between it. A couple of the first compositions went on New Magnetic Wonder, and I had discovered this one chord that sounded especially beautiful. It had sort of this open, ringing quality to the beat frequencies. They're very slow, phasing through the beat frequencies, sort of like the resonances of like ringing bells or like maybe a Tibetan prayer bowl or something like that. And so I recorded just that chord, and we made it the opening chord of the album. My thought was, we have a new chord, let's start a new album with it. As we were mixing the album, we had at the studio where we were mixing, Bryce Goggins' studio in Brooklyn, Trout Studios, which is incredible. We did the last two albums, a large chunk of the recording there and mixing. So when we were mixing, we had the songs going through an oscilloscope. And so with the oscilloscope, you can kind of see the fuzzy, pulsating waveforms go by as the music goes by on the screen. Generally, it looks something like really fast, random-looking sine waves passing by, or sort of like this fuzzy globule that looks kind of like a galaxy. As the music's playing, the thing's kind of pulsing in and out in a sort of staticky way. We had it set to this galaxy-looking configuration, and as the chord played, as you get just a single sine wave, the first tone on the album, there was just sort of this like nice, neat, oscillation on the screen, like you might imagine a single sine wave. As the second note and then the third note came in, suddenly the thing turned into like this 3D vector graphics-looking knot that was spinning slowly on the oscilloscope screen. Like I said, the oscilloscope usually is this fuzzy-looking galaxy of static, this little blob that kind of like throbs on the screen. And here we have like a pulsating vector graphic-looking knot, like might have been generated by like a 70s computer art. We were all like looking at the oscilloscope screen like, whoa, that is crazy. The oscilloscope must have been registering the beat frequencies, which, and the whole thing kind of simplified mathematically, and that was like being shown on the screen of the scope. For the second album that we used it on, which was Travelers in Space and Time, that was like our most recent album. The album had a futuristic theme. The whole album was intended as a time capsule for listeners in the future. I thought that for the record, it would be fun to record a song, like a rock song, where we used the logarithmic scale. The root note of the scale, just the first tone, the opening tone of the logarithmic scale, can be tuned to any pitch that you want. So I tuned it to middle C. Actually, the thing is, I knew what the frequency for middle C was, the numerical frequency, so I based the whole scale on that just because I knew it off the top of my head. You have the middle C is one of the notes in the scale, and also the fifth of the root note of the scale, which is G in that case, is also a member of the scale. It's just that it falls on a different key. I thought, well, we can have a song where the song just goes between G and C, which I can play on the guitar and we can play on a bass. Any good pop song or garage rock song could have the restriction that it only has two chords. That could be an awesome song. So I'm going to write just a two-chord song. Then I can both play a regular song and sing a song that's in the regular scale that I like hearing and that's catchy to me, the chromatic scale. And then I can also have passages where we would go into the non-Pythagorean scale. So I wrote a catchy garage rock song called CPU. This raw garage rock song that doesn't have any chords. All of the instruments are just playing notes. If you play chords, then you're introducing notes that won't be in the logarithmic scale at all. It just kind of rides between G and C, and there are sections of the song where you have the logarithmic scale playing. It has kind of a spacey garage rocky kind of sound and string chords and stuff. And then when the singing is happening, it's in the regular scale. So it goes between kind of catchy, weird, and so on throughout the song. It's cool to experiment with different sounds and write fun songs in different ways, and most importantly, there's some theoretical interest to me in the thing about the beat frequencies, but the most important thing is that you just have different tools to make music and to make sound with, and it's fun to play with those sorts of things. You're like painting a painting, you look down, there's some leaves on the ground, you stick them on the painting. Like that's what this is. There's cool stuff lying around in the universe, and you use it in your art project. And that, and for me that was music. That's music, of course. But I think that's all I've got. Did that answer your question?
Let's do a quick mic check. If you could spell your name.
JonathанMiddleton. My name is Jonathan Middleton. I'm a composer, and I teach music composition and theory at Eastern Washington University.
Now, you're not actually a mathematician, which is weird for me. I'm used to speaking to mathematicians. So how did you start to get interested in, say, kind of the intersection of music and mathematics as you have?
Well, I'm a composer, but I've always had very strong interest in interdisciplinary environments. And I had learned that there's a creative process called algorithmic composition, which involves music composition through algorithms. And I had students, and myself included, who were quite unfamiliar with algorithms. And so, just for a little bit of context, most musically trained individuals are not familiar with algorithms. But mathematicians are, computer science students are. So what I wanted to create was an environment where my students and myself could work with algorithms in a user-friendly environment to create music. And at the same time, I wanted to create an environment where non-musically trained individuals could create music as well. So basically, I developed music algorithms with the assistance of students at Eastern Washington University and a grant, and basically put it up on the web as freeware for anyone to use. Whether they wanted to create music or not, is entirely up to them, but I use it to create music, and other people might just use it as a sort of sound graphing tool to hear digits of pi, or hear digits of hear the Fibonacci series, or whatever you want to input into the program.
So there's a decent amount in there that I want to unpack. One of the first things, when you say algorithmic composition, what does that actually mean?
Well, one could say that when Bach wrote canons, he was using an algorithm. I mean, a canon is an algorithm, or many medieval and Renaissance composers used algorithms in a musical context. Step 1, write a melody. Step 2, add some chords. Step 3, add more voices, add text. That certainly can be understood as algorithmic. But the type of algorithms that are being used today, or even since the 50s, those types of algorithms are very sophisticated, or many are. So if one were to take numbers and transform them into melodies, there are a set of steps to do that, and that's the type of algorithm I work with, or the types that I work with. They're not complex, but they're complex enough so that there are several steps that are needed to help guide someone who's unfamiliar with them. But it's true, if you look at the general definition of an algorithm, canons are algorithms, and canons have been around for years, many hundreds of years. So I guess there are two ways to approach that definition. The broader way or a more specific way. And like, for example, there are composers who might use like a flock algorithm or genetic algorithms to create music, chaos algorithms. I mean, there are all kinds of really neat algorithms out there that one could apply in a musical context or with a musical result. And there are lots of very sophisticated software to do that. Some of those software are free, but many of those software are not as user friendly as they could be. So that's where what I do is maybe a little bit different. I try to provide something that's user friendly, obviously more limited in its scope, but able to help someone get a result pretty quick and to input almost anything they want.
So as you said, there's probably two groups that this is most targeted at: people who are musically inclined or people who are numerically inclined. So when someone who is musically inclined goes to the website and starts looking around, what would you kind of expect or think that they will be getting out of it?
Well, a process of discovery, basically, because most of the time when a composer inputs numbers, and I also have used DNA as well, or letters, they don't really know what the result's going to be. The way I work is I'll input some numbers, a numeric sequence, and then I'll scale it to a range of a musical instrument. It could be the full range of the piano, it could be the range of the violin. And in that scaling process, I don't know where those numbers are going to fall in the keyboard range. I don't know if I'm going to have many black keys, many white keys, a mix of both. And that's a process of discovery that's very interesting to me. And usually one thinks of a composer sort of sitting at the piano and waiting for inspiration, and they get it and they work out a catchy melody. But this is different. This is like the computer's giving me a melody that's derived from something that may have meaning to me. It may not have meaning, but at least it's something derived from something other than myself.
Now, what about a numerically inclined person, much more like myself? I've tried to be in bands. I'm terribly unmusical as a kind of default rule. What would you think that I might be able to find? I mean, there's a spoiler. I have actually gone and played around on the site.
Okay.
But if I was first coming to it, what would you kind of think that I might find from it?
Well, I mean, on the most basic level, a musical experience, because you will have, whether you like it or not, you will have composed a melody. And the nice thing about it is if you compose a melody that you don't like, you can always go back and in a few clicks later compose a new one. And sometimes I've had students create a melody that wasn't so interesting, and they're listening to it with a piano sound, and then when they moved the cursor to a marimba sound or some other instrument, it actually sounded a lot better. So it might depend on what the sounds are, or what vehicle the melody is coming through in terms of instrumentation. But yeah, it's basically a musical experience that's closer to where your interests are with their math, with their numbers. You could have the same musical experience by going to the piano and trying to lay down some
No,
melodies.
no, I couldn't.
Okay. So I like to think that maybe it's idealistic of me, but I like to think that there are these musical experiences that people could have. Would you like me to demonstrate?
Oh yes,
something?
please.
Okay.
I would love to watch you demonstrate one of these.
Great. So let's start with a simple one like Pascal's triangle, because that's pretty familiar to most people. And in step one of the algorithm, we're going to basically tell the software how many rows of Pascal's triangle do we want to hear. So let's just take 10 rows. And when I ask it to present those rows, we see that the numbers get quite large rather quickly. We start with the number 1, and by the 10th row, we've got a high number of 126. In the next step of the algorithm, we want to basically take those numbers from Pascal's triangle and map them to an instrument range. And the default setting is for piano. Now we can hear it with silence, or we can hear it without just all pitches. Let's do it with all pitches without any silence. And I'm going to ask it to do what's called a division operation or proportionate representation. So all the high numbers in Pascal's triangle will be mapped to high pitches on the piano, and all the low numbers to low pitches on the piano. So it'll be proportionate spreading out of those Pascal's numbers throughout the piano. Then I can ask it to apply some similar principles with rhythm or what's called duration of the pitches. But just for a simple demonstration, I'll just use a uniform static rhythm so that we can just hear the numbers of Pascal moving through the keyboard. So I'll play it first with just plain rhythms, and then second I'll go back and add more rhythmic variety. So if you know Pascal's triangle, it's surrounded by ones, but in each row the numbers get larger and then they go back to 1 again. So we're going to hear a lot of low notes on the piano, and ever so often we're going to hear the sort of a melodic break from those low notes, and it's going to get a little higher. Here we go. There you go.
That actually sounds exactly like what I would expect the triangle to sound like.
Yeah. And what's really neat is before I go into the rhythm part, in our new revised form for this, we're actually applying inverse exponential functions. So we can actually go deeper into Pascal's triangle with much larger numbers and hear those as well. Would you like to hear an example of this time?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is something my students are working on right now. So that was roughly, I think it was 20 rows. I'm counting 19, but I'm sure it must be 20 from this Pascal's triangle.
Yeah, values going as high as, 92,378?
Yes, and the inverse exponential function helps bring those down to scale. It's also, I don't know if you noticed, it's mapped to a diatonic, what we call a diatonic major scale for in musical terms. So it should be a quote unquote pleasant sound, and you can hear it was slightly different from the previous one that way. Let's try it with rhythm. It's a little bit of rhythmic variation. What we can do is take the same Pascal numbers in the same order and ask the program to make those numbers that are small, like ones and twos, to be of a short duration, and those that are higher numbers to be of longer duration.
Really wanted to hold that high note.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing we can try is modulo. If we really wanted to shake it up a bit, it's tricky to explain modulo in a nutshell, but the end result is we're going to have a lot more variety rhythmically, because any number, whether it's low or high, could be equal to any other number that might be low or high.
So it's an operation using some sort of modular arithmetic.
Exactly.
So just dealing with the remainder, so you're never entirely sure what you're going to have.
Exactly. We're going to do mod 3 now with our Pascal's triangle, and we'll see what we get out of that.
Starting to sound more and more like music at this point.
Yes.
So mathematicians have been looking at things like Pascal's triangle. They've been looking at pi, phi, the distribution of prime numbers, things like that for millennia at this point, depending on which of those things you're talking about. And so I was wondering if you think that there might be something in representing them this way that might be able to perhaps give someone who's been looking at it visually for so long a different kind of perspective on how to, say, maybe tackle a problem or anything like that.
Yeah, I like to think there is that possibility. I mean, we have all kinds of senses, right? We have visual and tactile, but this is an oral experience, an oral representation. I think sometimes where things pop out, things become more salient when we hear them instead of just seeing them. I know personally, having worked with decimals expansions of pi with this software, I've learned more about pi, and I've learned more about where certain, like the numeric distribution of the first 20 numbers or 30 numbers of pi are, which is kind of interesting. Like, there aren't many zeros at the beginning. Where are the zeros? So I think that from my own, I mean, I'm not a mathematician, I'm a composer, but yeah. I would think that there can be some very interesting experiences through sound and maybe sound graphing numeric sequences where things would actually become more salient, or maybe more so if you had a very long string of numbers and it was just really hard to see, patterns. You could hear those patterns, which would be really exciting. I was going to do 50 digits of pi. There's 1 0 here. The first 50 digits, and I can hear that. That would be the silence if I did it. Do you want to hear the silence?
Yeah. So the silence of pi. Now that sounds like some really high level composition.
The silent note in pi. Did you hear the skip? That was the silence. Kind of wacky result there, I admit.
Yeah, I mean, with something like Pascal's triangle, where there's an inherent structure built into the way that the triangle is created. Now, I don't believe we know whether or not pi is actually random. I can't remember if it's the normal distribution or not. Mm-hmm. That's part of my math that I apparently forgot. Mm-hmm. But it is to the ear, it sounds a lot more kind of scattershot. So. Yeah. I was wondering kind of how, when you're doing some composition work, you can deal with the difference between like a structured example and a more chaotic example.
Right. Well, I like to think I can deal with anything that's thrown at me here, and if it seems more chaotic, I can actually scale it in ways so that the musical result actually is a little bit more feels more managed.
And that's just by changing the length of the possible scale notes and the actual operation used?
Yes, what I did was I took the numbers through decimal expansion of pi and applied a modulo operation. So they actually got all mixed. They were already apparently chaotic from the beginning. I made it even more chaotic, but in a very confined environment. There were only like 6. I think it was mod 7. I actually did mod 7 with the 9 numbers, and then with the rhythmic durations, I actually used a proportionate representation so that the lower numbers of pi were short values and the higher numbers were long values. The result, I had no idea what I was going to get. The result had a very haunting kind of feel to it, which is kind of interesting. I'm sure there are other ways of approaching it where I could make a much more cheerier representation.
Yeah, but we all know pi is a haunting number.
It's mysterious and haunting.
So how did the sound of your personal compositions change once you started dealing with algorithmic composition?
I think the sound may not have changed so much as the way I approached composing music. In the past, I've applied a much more free-form approach where I would find some ideas of the keyboard and develop them freely. And here, I was giving myself, through the program, a set of results to work with. And that was interesting because the process actually begins with a very fun approach to composition. It took away all the anxieties of how do I start a piece. So I try to start with numbers or DNA sequences that have some interest for me personally, and then I map those numbers or letters to certain instruments that interest me, and I hear the results, and if I like the results, I end up working with them. So as an example, I wrote a symphony called Redwood Symphony using Redwood DNA. The letters obviously get translated into numbers, and then those numbers get translated into pitches. And the instrument I was writing for was the xylophone, and it's a wood instrument. And usually symphonic works don't start with the xylophone. So that was also fun. And that piece has been performed quite a few times and professionally recorded, so I think that on some level my engagement with music through this vehicle is actually engaged listeners too, and musicians. which is nice.
Speaking of that, what sort of reaction have you gotten from the composition community or the math community? I know of a specific mathematician you have worked with. What sort of reactions have you gotten to your work?
I think some musicians are intrigued and interested. Others have told me that this is not music, which is fair enough. It probably depends how you define music. I had a student tell me one time that this is more than music. And I have to say that a lot of scientists and mathematicians are very, very embracing and welcoming of this tool. They really get it and they dig it. From the musical community, it varies. The responses vary, but there are times when I'll take the raw output, the algorithmic result, and I'll just put it on the page and give it to a musician and see what they do with it. But most of the time I don't do that. What I do is I refine and edit, and I shape the result to meet other objectives. I mean, the objective is not to hear pi, it's actually to create a composition that has some of myself in it too.
Yeah, so it just becomes just part of your toolbox of composition.
Part of the toolbox. It's actually what I like to call a starting point. It used to be in medieval music, composers would take a plain chant melody and they would adopt that for their larger choral pieces. So we call that taking a theme and adding variations, and that is kind of what I'm doing here. Is I'm getting a melody, taking a result, and then using that as a starting point. And that's a wonderful place to be as a composer, to actually have something to start with.
So on your website, you mentioned that you mentioned a lot of your compositions today have to do with numbers and nature. You mentioned the Redwood Symphony. Yep. So what other sort of things from nature are you now using to help start out your work?
Well, I like looking at endangered species or threatened species. So I wrote a piano piece recently using DNA from the boreal toad. Lately, I've been actually doing some work for scientists in translating their data into melodic representations. And I've been having some fun with that. It's a different way of composing, or different, how can I say this, a different purpose for composition. I'm used to writing a score for musicians that would get hopefully performed in a concert hall, and now I find myself writing melodies for scientists, some of whom are in Finland, England, and really basically helping them out in hearing their data, which is new and exciting for me and kind of fun. But I haven't been approaching those projects with the purpose of writing a composition. I've basically just been helping them out. So new projects, I might look at star charts, might try to work with chaos. I haven't done that yet. What I find with music algorithms is like a lifelong set of projects, and so I don't ever anticipating having writer's block or being lost looking for a project. There's just too much out there, and I haven't, as the project manager for creating the software, there are still algorithms on the site that I haven't explored fully yet.
Well, I mean, a career without writer's block, that's every creative person's dream, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that when an artist has a grasp of what's meaningful to them, then it's a wonderful space to be in, because they end up being more productive and spending less time worrying about what they're doing and more time producing. So I have to say I'm very fortunate for that.
Hey, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I am Danny Hansen, Samuel Hansen's father, and that is it for this episode of Relatively Prime. I would like to thank the guests, who are also our musicians this time around. Professor Scott Rickard of University College Dublin, Robert Schneider, lead singer of the Apples in Stereo, whom we also heard, and Professor Jonathan Middleton of Eastern Washington University, for being nice enough to actually speak to my son. If you want to find out more about the guests or the music, or if you want to discuss the show, please join us over at relprime.com. Oh, and while you're on the internet, why not head over to iTunes and leave a review of the show? It really does help other people find it. And if you have any feedback about the show, just email samuel@acmescience.com. That is my son's personal email address. Relatively Prime is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license, and any remixes are greatly looked forward to. Thank you for listening, and we hope you come back for the next episode.